October 1944. A German Panther tank commander scans the Belgian countryside through his periscope. His crew is experienced, his tank nearly invincible from the front. Then something hits them. The shaped charge punches through 100 millimeters of steel like it's paper. The Panther brews up in seconds. But here's what confuses the survivors who bailed out. The shot came from behind them, not from an ambush to their rear, from a vehicle they'd already passed. A vehicle that looked like it was driving the wrong direction. They'd dismissed it as retreating. It wasn't retreating. It was hunting. Welcome to the story of the Archer, the British tank destroyer that turned a fatal design flaw into the deadliest ambush weapon of the Western Front. Most military historians will tell you the Archer succeeded, despite its backwards gun. That's wrong. The Archer succeeded because of its backwards gun, and understanding why requires going back to 1942, when Britain faced a problem that conventional thinking couldn't solve. North Africa, late 1942. British tank crews are encountering something new. The Tiger, a heavy tank, over 50 tons of German engineering with frontal armor so thick that Britain's standard anti-tank weapons simply bounced off. The 6-pounder anti-tank gun, Britain's workhorse, could penetrate about 90 millimeters of armor at 500 meters under perfect conditions. The Tiger's frontal plate measured 100 millimeters. Do the math. At standard combat ranges, shooting a Tiger from the front with a 6-pounder was like throwing stones at a castle wall. After-action reports from Tunisia paint a grim picture. Anti-tank batteries engaging Tigers frontally watched their rounds spark off harmlessly. Crews described the psychological impact. When a Tiger appeared, you either flanked it, got dangerously close, or you died. There was no middle option. British tankers began viewing the Tiger as nearly invincible. That's not just a morale problem. That's a tactical crisis. When your troops believe they can't win, they've already lost. Something had to change. Britain needed a gun that could kill Tigers frontally at combat ranges, and they needed it fast. Britain's answer was elegant. The Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder. 76.2 millimeters of precisely engineered violence. With standard armor-piercing rounds, it could penetrate 140 millimeters at 1,000 meters. That alone was revolutionary. But with the new armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition, APDS, those numbers climbed to 231 millimeters. Tigers, Panthers, even the frontal armor that had seemed impossible, all vulnerable. The 17-pounder could kill anything Germany fielded. It was the great equalizer. There was just one problem. Actually, there were several problems, and they all came down to physics. The 17-pounder weighed over 2 tons. The barrel stretched over 4 meters long. When it fired, the recoil forces were enormous, enough to knock a light vehicle backwards or tear mounting brackets clean off if improperly secured. This wasn't a gun you could just bolt onto any chassis. This was a weapon that demanded respect and space and engineering genius. Britain needed this gun mobile. They needed it on tracks, able to keep pace with advancing armor, able to reposition quickly when German counterattacks came. They needed a self-propelled anti-tank gun. Engineers at Vickers Armstrong evaluated every available option. The Churchill? Too heavy, and the turret ring wouldn't accommodate the gun without massive modifications. The Crusader? Too light, underpowered, and the suspension would collapse. The Cromwell? Possible, but it required extensive redesign that would take years. That project eventually became the Challenger, but Britain couldn't wait. Then someone suggested the Valentine. On paper, it was perfect. Over 8,000 Valentines had been built during the war, more than any other British tank. The production lines at Vickers Armstrong in Newcastle were mature, efficient, proven. The chassis was reliable, combat tested from North Africa to Russia. And critically, Valentines were becoming obsolete as gun tanks. The infrastructure existed. The vehicles were available. There was one problem. A big problem. The Valentine was too small to mount the 17-pounder facing forward. Engineer Leslie Little and his team at Vickers faced an impossible puzzle. If they mounted the gun conventionally, pointing forward over the driver, the vehicle became catastrophically front-heavy. Early calculations showed the front suspension would collapse under the weight. The center of gravity shifted so far forward that the vehicle became unstable. And the recoil. In conventional configurations, when the 17-pounder fired, the breech recoiled violently backwards. In the cramped Valentine hull, that meant the gun breech recoiled directly into the driver's position. In early mock-ups, engineers calculated that firing the gun would kill the driver, not injure. Kill. The layout simply wouldn't work facing forward. Every conventional solution failed. Every normal approach hit the same walls: weight distribution, recoil space, structural integrity. So, Leslie Little did something no other designer had attempted. He turned the gun around, mount the 17-pounder facing rearward, pointing over the engine deck instead of the crew compartment. Suddenly, everything changed. The weight balanced properly over the rear drive sprockets. The recoil had space to travel without crushing anyone. The driver sat up front, protected, ready to drive forward the instant the gun fired. And the vehicle could use existing Valentine production lines with minimal modification. The resulting vehicle, designated the Archer, carried a crew of 4: commander, gunner, loader, driver. They shared a cramped, open-topped fighting compartment with 39 rounds of 17-pounder ammunition stacked around them. The armor ranged from 14 to 60 millimeters, depending on location, thinner than the original Valentine in places to save weight. This wasn't a vehicle designed to take hits. This was a vehicle designed never to be hit in the first place. A General Motors 6-cylinder diesel engine provided 192 brake horsepower, pushing the Archer to 32 kilometers per hour on roads. Not fast, but adequate. Speed wasn't the point. Lethality was the point. When the first prototype rolled out of the Vickers Armstrong workshops in Newcastle in May 1943, everyone who saw it thought there had been a mistake. The gun faced backwards, not slightly angled, completely backwards. Military observers at the first demonstrations were genuinely confused. Some suspected a manufacturing error. Others wondered if the workers had assembled it wrong as some kind of joke. They hadn't. The military establishment was not impressed. Trial reports from June 1943 list the complaints in exhaustive detail. Artillery officers wanted a rotating turret, not a fixed casemate. They demanded more gun depression, more traverse than the mere 11 degrees left and right that the Archer offered. They wanted more ammunition storage, more room in the fighting compartment, better visibility, thicker armor, conventional layout. The Archer provided none of these things. It was cramped, open-topped, thinly armored, and absurdly unconventional. It looked wrong. It felt wrong. According to every established doctrine, it was wrong. Yet the War Office ordered 800 of them. Compare that to roughly 200 Challengers. The tank destroyer with a proper forward-facing turret. The ministry ordered 4 times as many of the backwards vehicle. Why? Pragmatism defeated idealism. The Archer weighed just 15.2 tons, roughly half the weight of the American M10 Wolverine. It stood only 2.24 meters tall, giving it one of the lowest profiles of any vehicle mounting the 17-pounder. It could hide behind hedgerows, stone walls, reverse slopes, anywhere that larger tank destroyers would be immediately spotted. And most critically, it could be built now. Not in a year. Not after extensive development. Now. Production began at the Elswick Works in Newcastle, a sprawling facility stretching 3 miles along Scotswood Road, with over 18,000 workers dedicated to war production. By May 1945, 655 Archers had rolled off the production line. The original order called for 800, but victory in Europe canceled the remaining contracts. 655 vehicles that everyone thought looked wrong. 655 vehicles that were about to prove everyone wrong. Now, before we get into how this worked in combat, if you're finding this interesting, consider subscribing. Takes just a second and helps the channel grow. Now let's see what happened when the Archer met German armor. The Archer entered operational service in October 1944, officially designated a self-propelled anti-tank gun rather than a tank destroyer, a bureaucratic distinction that meant it was crewed by Royal Artillery rather than tank regiments. The first 13 vehicles reached 21st Army Group in November 1944. This was late in the war. D-Day was history. The Normandy breakout was complete. The great tank battles in the Bocage were finished. But the fighting wasn't over. The final campaigns across the Rhine and into Germany itself would test every weapon the Allies possessed, and the Archer would prove its worth in ways its critics never imagined. British doctrine prescribed specific tactics that exploited the backwards-facing gun. These weren't improvisations. This was deliberate tactical doctrine, written specifically for the Archer's unique characteristics. The procedure went like this. Identify a strong firing position. Reverse the Archer into position, gun facing the expected enemy approach. Use natural cover to conceal that remarkably low silhouette. Wait. When German armor entered the kill zone, fire. The 17-pounder was accurate well beyond 1,000 meters. A competent crew could achieve 10 rounds per minute if ammunition supply allowed. And here's where the tactical genius of the backwards design revealed itself. After firing, the driver simply drove forward, no turning required, no exposing thin side armor while rotating the vehicle, no complex reversing under fire. The vehicle that approached backwards left forwards, engine roaring, already moving before German gunners could acquire their target. The muzzle flash came from the rear of the vehicle. German tank commanders trained to identify threats by their orientation suddenly found themselves confused. The vehicle looked like it was facing away from them when it fired. By the time they realized what happened, the Archer was gone. Panzer crews facing Archers often had no idea what hit them. The low profile meant they were scanning for taller vehicles. The unconventional configuration meant it didn't match anything in German recognition manuals. And the shoot and scoot doctrine meant that by the time they identified the threat, it had vanished. According to veteran accounts compiled by the Tank Museum at Bovington, crews who initially mocked the design came to appreciate it in combat. One period report noted that the rear mounting was seen as an advantage since the vehicle did not need to turn around to retreat. Another observed that the low profile made it perfect for ambush tactics. The Archer saw action during Operation Veritable in February 1945, the massive offensive to clear the Rhineland. Imperial War Museum photographs document Archers operating in the flooded streets of Kranenburg on February 11th, supporting the attack on Gach on the 19th. The flooded conditions during this offensive actually favored the relatively light Archer. Heavier American and British tank destroyers bogged down in the mud. The Archer, at just over 15 tons, could operate where others couldn't. In Italy, Archers arrived in early 1945, supporting the final spring offensive. The 7th Anti-Tank Regiment of the 2nd Polish Corps employed them in the last Italian operations against German defensive lines in the mountains. The mountainous terrain and narrow Italian roads suited the compact Archer perfectly. Where larger American M10s and M36 tank destroyers struggled on hairpin mountain turns, the Archer could position itself in unexpected locations. German commanders defending mountain passes expected anti-tank guns in certain positions, dictated by what vehicles could physically reach those positions. The Archer reached positions they thought impossible, and that meant German armor advancing through mountain passes encountered killing fire from directions they hadn't prepared for. The brutal answer? Everything. According to Royal Armored Corps penetration assessments, the 17-pounder could penetrate Tiger I frontal armor at standard combat ranges. Not just the side or rear, the frontal plate that had made the Tiger seem invincible. The Archer could kill it. Against the Panther, period analysis suggested the side armor was vulnerable at long range, potentially beyond 2,000 yards under favorable conditions. The gun mantlet was also vulnerable, though at closer distances. Only the Panther's highly sloped glacis plate remained genuinely difficult, requiring shots under 200 meters for reliable penetration. But here's the key detail. 200 meters was well within the Archer's effective ambush range, and crews had other options. Side shots, mantlet shots, track shots to immobilize, then finish the job. British crews learned to use camouflage to disguise their Archers. They painted disruptive white patterns on the barrel, making German observers think they faced standard 75mm guns rather than the deadly 17-pounder. The same trick employed on Sherman Fireflies. By the time German crews realized what they were facing, their tank was already burning. How did the Archer stack up against other tank destroyers? The comparison reveals why Britain made 6 of them. The German Jagdpanzer IV, mounting the long 75mm Pak 42, weighed around 24 tons and carried up to 80mm of sloped frontal armor. Better protected than the Archer? Certainly, and the gun was respectable. But the Archer's 17-pounder outperformed it significantly in raw penetration. This was the deliberate trade-off: protection sacrificed for firepower and concealment. The American M10 Wolverine weighed nearly 30 tons, achieved 88mm of penetration with its 3-inch gun, and offered a full rotating turret. In tactical flexibility, the M10 had advantages. In a mobile engagement, the turret was invaluable. But in an ambush, the Archer was superior. And in 1944 to 1945, as the Allies advanced into Germany, ambush tactics dominated anti-tank warfare. Here's the remarkable detail that validates the design. According to contemporary accounts, some British artillery crews came to favor their Archers over the American-made M10 Achilles they received through Lend-Lease. The shoot-and-scoot capability that seemed so absurd on paper proved devastatingly effective in the right tactical situations. The Achilles had a turret, better protection, and conventional layout. The Archer had none of these things. But crews preferred it anyway, because it kept them alive and killed German tanks. The Archer's story didn't end in 1945. That alone tells you something about the design. Egypt purchased 200 ex-British Archers after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. During the Suez Crisis of 1956, Egyptian crews fielded Archers against Israeli armor. 13 years after British artillery officers complained about the design, it was still killing tanks. Jordan received 36 vehicles for their Arab Legion in 1952. These served into the late 1950s, before being replaced by more modern equipment. The design that looked wrong in 1943 was still viable in 1956. That's not a failure. That's validation. 650 RFU-5 built, service spanning over a decade, combat in Western Europe, Italy, and the Middle East, export to 3 nations. This backwards-looking vehicle that confused everyone who first saw it proved exactly what British engineering could achieve when conventional thinking was abandoned. The Archer demonstrates a truth about military technology that applies far beyond World War II. The best solution isn't always the obvious one. Sometimes the best solution looks completely wrong until you understand the problem it solves. Vickers Armstrong faced an impossible problem. The gun was too big. The chassis was too small. Every conventional approach failed. So they built something that looked wrong to everyone who saw it. and it worked better than alternatives that looked right. The Americans built the M10 with a proper rotating turret, conventional, sensible, exactly what doctrine prescribed. The Germans built the Jagdpanzer with thick frontal armor and logical layout. Both designs made sense on paper. Both looked like tank destroyers should look. But neither could match the 17-pounder's killing power, combined with the Archer's ability to vanish after each shot. Neither could achieve the same weight efficiency, the same low profile, the same tactical flexibility in ambush situations. Here's what the critics missed in 1943, and what German tank crews learned the hard way in 1945. The backwards gun wasn't a flaw. It was the entire point. The Archer wasn't designed to fight like a tank destroyer was supposed to fight. It was designed to fight the way tank destroyers actually fight. Not in mobile engagements, not trading shots in open terrain, in ambush, from concealment. Strike and disappear. For that mission, the backwards gun was perfect. Drive forward into position, already oriented for escape. Fire. Drive forward again, no turning required. By the time the enemy reacts, you're gone. The gun facing backwards meant the driver faced forward, hands on controls, ready to move the instant the gunner fired. That's not a design flaw. That's tactical brilliance translated into steel. The low profile that came from mounting the gun rearward meant the Archer could hide where other vehicles couldn't. That's not a compromise. That's a deliberate advantage. The weight distribution that came from the unusual layout meant the vehicle could operate on terrain that bogged down heavier tank destroyers. That's not a limitation. That's expanded operational capability. Every single element that made the Archer look wrong made it tactically superior for its actual mission. The engineers at Vickers understood something the critics didn't. Looking right matters less than working right. That's British engineering in a nutshell. Not elegant, not pretty, not what anyone expected, but effective when it mattered most. The British didn't try to out-tiger the Germans. They didn't build heavier, slower, more heavily armored vehicles that looked impressive in procurement reviews. They took an obsolete chassis, mounted their best gun backwards, and created a weapon that killed Tigers and Panthers from ambush. That's the genius of it. While everyone else was designing vehicles that looked like proper tank destroyers, Britain built a vehicle that worked like a proper tank destroyer should work in actual combat conditions. The Archer proves that sometimes the best solution is the one that makes everyone uncomfortable, the one that looks wrong in the factory, the one that confuses observers at trials, the one that makes conventional thinkers shake their heads. Because once it reaches combat, none of that matters. What matters is, does it kill the enemy? Does it keep the crew alive? Does it accomplish the mission? The Archer did all three. The 17-pounder that killed Tigers and Panthers, mounted backwards on an obsolete chassis, crewed by artillerymen who learned to love the strangest tank destroyer of the war. 655 vehicles that everyone said looked wrong. 655 vehicles that proved looking right matters less than being right. That's how the British Archer used its flaw to destroy superior German armor. By understanding that the flaw wasn't a flaw at all, it was the solution everyone else was too conventional to see.